I want to just talk about the bigger diplomatic moves because tomorrow there's a meeting in Saudi Arabia between hosted by Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who's invited leaders of Gulf countries, other Gulf countries, Egypt and Jordan, to Riyadh to discuss the it's sort of a counter proposal to Donald Trump's plan, or to put together their own Gaza reconstruction plan. And there's something very sort of odd about this because everyone is saying they reject Trump's plan, the Riviera plan, which, as you mentioned, John, Steve Witkoff, Trump's representative, is walking back and saying, oh, it's just his vision of a better place. It's sort of pie in the sky. It's not a real plan. But why aren't they, well, I guess we'll see what they come out with tomorrow. But the reports that have come out in the last few days in the Egyptian press and the Israeli press are that Egypt is putting forward a plan which is really attempting to, again, this is my reading, goes a long way to appeasing Israel and the United States. So they're saying, well, we won't, obviously, we're not going to have people, Palestinians, leave Gaza during reconstruction, but they'll be moved to safe zones within Gaza. Then we'll come in with the heavy equipment, we'll clean everything up, and Egyptian companies will lead the reconstruction, which I suppose would be great for them because there'll be a lot of work in that, or a lot of business in that. And then the question they're all hung up on or vague about is the so-called day after, the governance of Gaza. And Hamas has said, we don't need to govern Gaza. We're happy to come up with some arrangement. But Egypt saying that it's going to be maybe former Palestinian Authority officers with some Western trained forces. It's all very vague. This is how it was reported in Al-Ahram and in the Israeli press. And I'm just wondering why they can't come out and say very plainly, we support the self-determination of the Palestinian people, which means that Palestinians alone get to decide who governs them and how. And reconstruction is not something to be negotiated about. It's a right. And moreover, we should be talking, as Ilan Pape said, about the right of return. They should be putting that on the agenda instead of saying, oh, we're going to rebuild Gaza and keep people in Gaza forever. They're saying they should be saying we're going to rebuild Gaza as an interim phase to implementing the right of return to these people to their homes. You don't like that? Well, that's what international law is. That's what the rights of the Palestinians are. I mean, what I'm saying is you don't get anywhere by an appeasement agenda which says let's try to tailor our proposals to what we think Israel and the US can live with. And so I hope, I mean, the statements from Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudi leadership have been uncharacteristically strong in recent weeks in response to Trump, stronger than some of the others. And so I don't want to prejudge it, but I'm hoping that they come back with very firm positions and not try to say, oh, let's find a way to make, Donald Trump happy.
Right. Right. The appeasement strategy, the strategy of trying to return to, whatever the status quo was, where, Gaza was, a hermetically sealed ghetto, a concentration camp with a siege that has lasted for 18 years now as collective punishment for people in Gaza exercising their right to vote. That is not the status quo that anybody should have to return to. And I think that yeah, I think it's unconscionable that people haven't that the mediators, that those with any sort of lever of power in this. It's unconscionable that they haven't brought that to the table yet. I mean, maybe
And
it will be forced upon them.
I think
But
about that conversation we had with Asim and Nabi a couple of weeks ago, the
yeah,
spokesperson for the Gaza municipality and an engineer, and saying we should be leading the reconstruction. We know how to
that's right.
do this. We
Right.
we need the resources, we need the support, but we know how to do this. And that should be the message, that Palestinians should lead the reconstruction. They should be deciding how to rebuild Gaza. They should be doing the planning. I remember when I went to Gaza in 2013, and I remember after entering from Rafah and going up the coastal road and seeing in that southern part of Gaza this pristine, beautiful coastline, unspoiled and barely built, because a lot of that coastline was taken up by the settlement, one of the big Israeli settlements
Yeah.
on the coast. So, the settlements were relatively small. They controlled a large amount of land, but they didn't have a lot of construction because there were only a few thousand settlers, like 6,000 settlers, taking up 40% of the land in Gaza. And I remember thinking at that time, if, and this was a time when, I mean, you still see this, but all over the region, you had these huge, it was sort of this transformative moment where you saw this hyper development funded by the Gulf all over the region, in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Egypt, and other countries, of these massive real estate developments, towers. Was the time of Rawabi, when Rawabi was being talked up
Hmm.
in the West Bank, this Gulf-funded Palestinian settlement. I mean, I
Yeah.
can only call it,
It looked
it,
like
it
it. Yeah.
yeah, that's what it is.
Yeah.
And I just thought to myself, if those same capitalists ever get their hands on this land
Yeah.
and on this coastline, it will be stolen from the people of Gaza. They will not be able to see the beach. They were blocked from getting to the beach by the settlers all those years. Now they will be blocked by capital and real estate and luxury development. And that's what, Jared Kushner and Donald Trump are talking about, basically, because this is such incredible, you know, coastline.
Yeah.
That's how they see it. That's the first thing they see. But I don't think they're the only ones who see it that way. There are even there are people in the region who see it that way. There are probably Palestinian capitalists who see it that way, the
Mm.
type of people who would build a Rawabi or build some of these other
Yeah.
ugly developments in and around Ramallah. And I mention that to say that it has to be, this has to be rebuilt, reconstruction led by the people of Gaza for the people of Gaza and
Yeah.
not anyone else. No one should be allowed to steal this from them.
That's right.
And that's the thing that worries me the most in all this discourse about this plan and that plan, is none of them take into account actually respecting Palestinians, particularly Palestinians in Gaza.
Well, Hamas did, and that's actually one of the interesting stories about why in 7 years later after the disengagement, you saw that in what was Gush Katif, is that they didn't just take it all over, because Hamas said that we need to have a national plan for what we do with this land. We're not just going to sell off the plots to whoever had money and whatever. They want to have a national program for it, but because the siege was met basically began almost immediately after the disengagement, that never could happen. That plan could never happen. But Hamas protected that land, and then the siege started, the blockade of Hamas, and then of course the string of wars, which basically were unending. Right? They went from 2008, 2009 into 2011, 2012, 2014. All the wars over and over again, and the siege remained. And this is what's complicated about stage two negotiations, is that stage two negotiations can only happen if stage three is complete. Stage two is dependent on stage three. And it was written like that for a specific reason, because Yahya Sinwar said it as clear as anyone that the siege is warfare. We are going to have a period of calm. A ceasefire cannot have the siege. The siege has to be part of the end of this war that was begun on October 7th or 1948, depending on how you want to frame it. That the siege has to be broken. So these plans, they just make a very complicated stage two, and I think that. Um, I mean, analysts, people who are watching this closely, I think that this is a period that could be starting on Saturday, could become an indefinite period of time where it's unclear um, how things are going to go, because it does seem like Witkoff and the Trump administration are pushing for stage two. Stage two's complicated negotiations that we will watch those happen over weeks and maybe months.
Mm.
And so yeah, it's a very uncertain moment that we're getting to after these 6 weeks of really well organized. I mean, Israel violated, like you said in your news report, Nora, violated the ceasefire in a number of ways, including what I described at the end of mine, that they're not letting the heavy machinery and the tents and the trailers are not
Yeah.
coming in at the rate they're supposed to be. But other than that, it has held, and it has been organized, and it has had a natural flow to it. That ends on Saturday, and
Mm.
it becomes an unclear, indeterminate amount of time until we get a
Yeah.
deal. And that deal is the part of the deal that it's difficult, after the interview with Dr. Pape, to see Netanyahu and his coalition. There's just a lot of question marks going
Yeah.
forward after this next weekend.
I know a lot of people are justifiably worried about the end of the ceasefire. We've seen Israeli violations of the ceasefire, and as you say, John, it's very uncertain what's going to happen now after the end of phase one. But I think and I was talking to a friend the other day who said to me, I was trying to say, well, I was giving the optimistic take of the ceasefire, that I'm optimistic about it holding, and I was explaining because of there's still going to be a number of Israeli captives to be negotiated in
Yeah.
phase two, as we know, and he said, well, Israel doesn't care about the captives, and I think there's good reasons to think that, and we've seen, as we've covered extensively, the Hannibal Directive and so forth, and the indiscriminate bombing of the whole of the Gaza Strip, including where the captives are and so forth. But I think Israel now is going to be stuck in a dilemma between those two instincts, where it won't be able to help itself, but to be able, it's going to be putting out in its propaganda, oh well, Hamas still holds the hostages, they still hold some of the hostages, and they need to release them right now. So by doing that, they're going to be highlighting the fact that, well, very publicly and very loudly highlighting the fact that, well, actually, you need to go back to negotiations, while at the same time not wanting to. As we've seen, Netanyahu is doing his best to sabotage the ceasefire.
Yeah.
There's these dynamics are going to be playing out in interesting ways, I think, and of course there's the whole factor of internal dynamics of Israeli society, where the relatives of the captives are still going to be demanding that the Israeli government returns to negotiations to complete these prisoner exchanges.